I voted in the primary in 2012 for Ron Paul. But I'm back on the wagon and still going strong. Thank you for your support. I'm also a recovering neocon. And unlike most neocons, I actually spent time in the military. So it kind of makes me wonder how I stayed a neocon as long as I did. Basically what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to tell my story of my conversion, how I came to the full logical conclusion and embraced the A word, abolitionism. And I don't really have a whole lot of answers on how to solve it. I have some ideas. I do know that if I did claim to have the answers, a bunch of people would demand that I start ruling them immediately. My conversion started a few years ago. Like most libertarians, I was watching Glenn Beck. Well, actually, like most statist neocons, I was watching Glenn Beck. And Tom Woods was on there.
Oh.
So, yep, Tom Woods takes the blame. But he was talking about the Forgotten Depression of 1920 and 21. Obviously, it's forgotten because they forgot to mention it in school. Mm-hmm. And he talked about the difference between that 18-month-long financial crisis, economic collapse, whatever you want to call it, and the, how long did the Great Depression go? 14 years?
Something like that. So World War II?
15.
So the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Technically, yeah.
So he's talking about all this stuff, and he's doing a comparison, and I'm like, wait a minute. The government schools taught me that the government interventions of the New Deal solved the Great Depression. And then, of course, you know, I had also wound up listening to, what's his name, the fat drug addict? Rush Limbaugh. Yeah, I wound up listening to Rush Limbaugh a few years after high school. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can kind of go along with this. And with him, it was World War II that ended the Great Depression. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm just a bunch of liberals in the government schools anyway. You know, so it must be, you know, World War II brought us out. And, you know, being that I was a statist, which meant that I was a repeater, that I rambled the slogans, talking points, and other useless nonsense that everybody else did. I had no idea what it meant. It was a really good catchphrase. It sounded good. And you know, hey, everybody else is saying it, so, you know, it must be cool. Interestingly enough, I became a libertarian because it's so socially acceptable. And everybody's on board with it, right? Obviously, there's not a whole lot of libertarian polygamy. But anyway, after watching Tom on Glenn Beck's show talk about the Depression, I Googled the article, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, really? And I'd always had an interest in economics. I didn't really know where to go to find it, but I had an interest. I was watching CNBC, so I was listening to all the Keynesians and statist economists and everything else. I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. You know, the free market screws it up, and then the government comes in and says, get out of the way, you fools. My God, you can't be trusted with nothing. You know, come to find out, there really is no free market. But anyway, I'm reading the article, and embedded in his article, there's a link to a YouTube video of his lecture on the topic, which went into more detail. And that's my first time using YouTube. So I'm like, wow, this guy's bringing me along the way. And I went to his website, and I'm looking at all these different articles that he's written that are on his website, and I went through all of them, and you know, I'm learning this, I'm learning that. And what I like about Austrian economics is that it's a pretty simple thing to look at. The way it's explained is you can look at the details of it, and you can see A, B, C, D. You know, where with a lot of the other stuff, you see A, X, Y, plus Jello equals, you know. So it was very easy to understand, and And I think it's purposely easy to understand because they don't have to hide all the bullshit. But anyway, so I'm on his website and I see a link to his archives at the Mises Institute. And I'm like, I wonder what's over there. So I hovered my mouse and the cursor over that link. And then I clicked it. And I got exposed to a whole lot of stuff. Franz Oppenheimer, Lou Rockwell, Murray Rothbard, Bob Murphy. The list goes on and on and on. And I started learning about economics. I started learning about history. I started learning about philosophy, all these different things. And it was all this knowledge that I wasn't exposed to growing up, or I had evaded because, who the hell really needs to learn anything? I mean, if we needed to know it, the government schools would have taught us, right? So I'm going through all this stuff, and it's just like, you remember when Neo comes out of the Matrix after taking the red pill? Yeah, there I was, bald and naked on an exam table. That had nothing to do with my conversion.
You just like telling that part.
Yeah, I just, hey, I'm bald, I'm naked, no Trinity, damn it. But anyway, I'm going through all this stuff and I'm soaking it up like a sponge. It's like being a kid again with this exposure to all this new stuff. And of course, Tom was still my favorite. But the things that I learned why government fails at everything. More specifically, I had learned why state socialism fails at everything.
There we go.
Now, when I reference socialism for the rest of the night, unless I say otherwise, I'm going to be referring to the involuntary, compulsory, coercive state socialism of the Soviet Union and the satellite states, North Korea, all that other stuff. I won't, not quite there yet.
Healthcare. Okay.
Well, as they used to say in Germany, hier kann das nicht passieren. Well, here in America, you say, well, that can't happen here. But anyway.
And we're walking.
Yeah. But I'm not going to be talking about hippie communes or worker co-ops and voluntary, private socialism. I'm going to be talking about state socialism. I learned about Ludwig von Mises in his writings about why socialism would fail. And he went into great painstaking detail to explain about the economic calculation problem. And I'm not going to go into all that because it could get a little bit complicated and time consuming. If you haven't read about it, I highly recommend it. It's really exciting stuff.
Not at all.
Shh. If I read it, they got to read it.
I read it. Not at all.
I'd also learned about the knowledge problem. And essentially, when you're dealing with central planning, especially at such a great magnitude, no person, no central planner, or no central planning committee can possibly have the knowledge necessary to be able to centrally plan that system. And of course, with economic calculation, you get into prices, feedback mechanisms, and all this other stuff. But it is impossible for a human to do this. So obviously, we need to find non-humans to do this, right? It just can't happen. So once you understand that central planning is doomed to failure due to the flaws inherent in that system, does it really matter who the central planners are? It's like trying to suspend the law of gravity, which I believe Congress is taking up in the next session. But here's the really interesting thing about Mises. Not only did he write this out in painstaking, explicit detail, he was in like a quasi-governmental position in Austria, Chamber of Commerce, and he had kept the socialist policies out of Austrian government policy in the 20s and before that, in the interwar period. And once Hitler came came to power and the Nazis were making their moves, Mises was chased across Europe. There was a price on his head because the National Socialist German Workers' Party just really didn't like his anti-socialism writings. And all of his stuff was captured and was stored in Berlin. When the Soviets came in, they captured his writings and took them back to Moscow. And they read them. Now, when you have a great explanation of why the system can't work, it makes sense that you say, gee, maybe we shouldn't go this route. But instead, the Soviets tried to reverse engineer all of his criticisms in an effort to make state socialism work. Rather than looking at the warnings, rather than understanding the reality that gravity is gravity and there's nothing you can do about it, they still went forward to do it.
Did it work?
Famously. But anyway, I think Eugene Genovese described the Soviet experiment quite nicely. He was a Marxist and a historian, and he was such a radical Marxist, I believe he got kicked out of the Communist Party USA because they were just too warm and fuzzy for him. At the fall of the Soviet Union, he said, the only thing that the Soviet experiment has provided us is nothing but failure and millions of debt. The KGB documented 43 million state murders in order to make socialism work. Estimates go up to 60 million, but they actually documented 43 million. Now, during the course of the Soviet Union, you had all these people here in America, like Paul Samuelson, John Kenneth Galbraith, and the other defenders of socialism, that said, any day now, the Soviet Union will be taking over the Americans in productivity. And the Soviet Union was always just one productivity report away from crushing the Americans. Meanwhile, the only thing that they really built were very long bread and toilet paper lines. Despite the murders caused by socialism, the executions, the starvations, the taking to the gulag of dissidents, despite the just absolute miserable failure, there are still people today that say, well, we can make it work. There are still supporters of state socialism. A lot of the young crowd today, probably about half of them are ardent supporters of it. And they always make the same excuses. Well, it just wasn't done right. If only the right people had been in charge. If only the plan had been followed.
Oh, Obamacare has been implemented successfully.
Yes, it has. You know what he told Sandra Fluke? You know what he told Sandra Fluke? If you like your free birth control, you can keep it. Yeah. But anyway, you still have all these people that support it, and they make those excuses. Why? Why do people ignore the warnings? Why do people ignore the results? Why do they think there's going to be a different outcome this time? Because state socialism, like the state itself, is a religion. It is based on a blind faith. It is an ideology. It defies all logic. It defies all reality. It is a belief system. Now, I'm going to set some terms here for the way that I use them. When I talk about governments, I'm talking about the guns and the people that wield them. When I talk about states with a small s, I'm talking about the geographic monopolies on the use of gun pointing. And when I talk about the state with a capital S, I'm talking about the religious belief that legitimizes the very existence of governments and states. I also became anti-war a few years ago. we'll get back to the whole state, socialism, and economic intervention stuff in a little bit. I became anti-war a number of years ago, partly because I was in the military during the Desert Storm era. I didn't get deployed. I'm happy about that. I saw a lot of people come back. I heard a lot of stories, but that right there just wasn't enough for me. During the Bush years, I was a supporter, neocon, and my leftist anti-war friends were asking me all these questions. Well, how do you justify this? What about the people that had absolutely nothing to do with the regime, that hated the regime? And I found that I really couldn't answer their questions honestly and stay with the positions that I had. And now that Obama's in charge, I'd like to return the favor to them. They seem to be MIA.
Yeah.
But what really did it for me, once again, was Tom Woods. How many are familiar with The War Prayer by Mark Twain? Okay. All right. I have a very chopped down version of this. This is what did it for me. It starts out with the time period leading up to war. There might be fighting already, but for this particular town, it's like a new time of entry, whatever. It was a time of great and exulting excitement. The country was up in arms, the war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. The drums were beating, the bands playing, the toy pistols topping, the bunch of firecrackers hissing and sputtering on every hand, and far down the receding and fading spreads of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily, the young volunteers marched down the wide avenue, gay and fine in their new uniforms. The proud fathers and mothers and sisters and sweethearts cheering them with voices choked with happy emotion as they swung by. That kind of reminds me of my time of enlisting, and then after the Iraq military invaded Kuwait, and it became obvious that the U.S. was going to get involved. The feelings that were being had by me, my fellow soldiers, the families, the community, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to jump ahead to when they're at the church, and they are giving their prayer. Sunday morning came. Next day, the battalions would leave for the front. The church was filled. The volunteers were there, their young faces alight with martial dreams, visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flashing sabers, the flight of the foe, the tumult, the enveloping smoke, the fierce pursuit, the surrender. The preacher was up giving his little, convocation, his little speech, prayer, sermon, whatever. He read a war chapter from the Old Testament. The first prayer was said. It was followed by an organ verse that shook the building, and with one impulse, the house rose, with glowing eyes and beating hearts, and poured out that tremendous invocation. God the all-terrible, thou who ordainest, thus thy clarion and lightning thy sword. Then came the long prayer. None could remember the like of it, for passionate pleading and moving and beautiful language. The burden of its supplication was that an ever merciful and benignant Father of us all would watch over our noble young soldiers and aid and comfort and encourage them in their patriotic work. Bless them and shield them in the day of battle and the hour of peril. Bear with them his mighty hand. Make them strong and confident, invincible to the bloody onset. Help them crush the foe. Grant to them and to their flag and country imperishable honor and glory. And he's going on with all this stuff, and this tattered old man in rags comes up, and he goes up to the pulpit, and he stands next to the priest. The priest doesn't know he's there because he's getting his groove on. Finally, he looks over and sees the old man there, and the old man touches his arm, and the preacher steps aside. The old man says, I come from the throne bearing a message from Almighty God. Those words smote the house with a shock. If the stranger perceived it, he gave no attention. He had heard the prayer of his servant, your shepherd, and will grant it if such be your desire. I, his messenger, have explained to you its import. That is to say, its full import. And what it goes into, and for those of you who are familiar with Bastiat's what is seen and what is unseen, you have heard your servant's prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned by God to put into words the other part of it, that part which the pastor, and also you in your hearts, fervently prayed silently and ignorantly and unthinkingly. God grant that it was so. You heard the words, grant us the victory, O Lord our God. That is sufficient. The whole of the uttered prayer is compact into those pregnant words. Elaborations were not necessary. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for many unmentioned results, which follow victory, must follow it, cannot help but follow it. Upon the listening Spirit of God fell also the unspoken part of the prayer. He commandeth me to put it into words. Listen. Lord our Father, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth into battle. Be thou near them, with them in spirit. We also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. O Lord our God, help us tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them roofless with their little children to wander unfriended in the wastes of their desolated land in rags and hunger and thirst. Sports of the sun flames in summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave and denied it. When you hear it that way, because most people don't think about it, it's kind of hard to deny what war is and what the results are. And after hearing that, it really hit home. I wanted to forget what I had heard. I wanted to click refresh and go back to my default setting of being a neocon and a statist, but I couldn't. I was watching the news and there would be talk of action in Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere else, and I'd say, yeah, kill. Shit. I couldn't unhear it. So, what brings people to think in that way, to demand that their fellow humans that they've never met, that have never harmed them, die painfully, suffer miserably? What brings that? I think Herman Goering said it best. Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for their lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. That is the religion of the state. The state is the only modern religion that still demands human sacrifice. That is why I embrace the A word 100%. Part of the philosophy that I looked into, and I just started thinking about all these different things, particularly the slogans. If only we could get back to the Constitution and get the right people in charge. Okay. Why doesn't it ever happen in 220 plus years?
power. So they'll find ways around it.
People want to wear the ring of power. They're not willing to throw it in the volcano like they should. Now, I'm not a Hobbesian. I don't believe that people are innately evil. But I do believe that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I do believe that is magnetic to the corruptible. And I believe, much like the knowledge problem, it is something that humanity is not capable of handling, that type of power. So, if we did get back to the Constitution, what would keep it from falling apart again?
Nothing.
Because after all, the system does require the right people and that the plan be followed. Now, also, if the system requires the right people and the plan has to be followed properly, you also have to accept the possibility that the wrong people will be in there and the system will get thrown to the side.
What if Hitler were elected president? What would he do?
What would he do? What did he do?
Exactly.
This whole idea of limiting it, of restraining it, of expecting it to behave itself, I'm sorry, but it's a false reality. People project what they envision the government and the Constitution to be. Jefferson said, a constitution or a government restrained by the chains of the Constitution. Okay, haven't seen much of that. People like Hamilton or specifically Teddy Roosevelt, and I believe these were his words actually, they envisioned a government empowered by the Constitution, that their every action be empowered. And that Teddy Roosevelt said that he could do anything that wasn't expressly prohibited by the Constitution. So, quite frankly, the Constitution is not going to save us. And, depending upon what your interpretation of it is, I see it as a problem. So when somebody says, well, we're a republic, we have a Constitution and Bill of Rights. Nice. From the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Chapter 5, Article 67. Citizens are guaranteed the freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, demonstration, and association. The state shall guarantee conditions for the free activity of democratic political parties and social organizations. From the German Democratic Republic, Article 28, that used to be East Germany. All citizens have the right to assemble peacefully within the framework of the principles and aims of the Constitution. People's Republic of China, Article 35. Citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, or procession, and of demonstration. So when I think back to that guy in Tiananmen Square looking at all those tanks, I just imagine him saying, if only we could get back to the Constitution. I don't think he's been seen since then.
Nope.
The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Article 57. Respect for the individual and protection of the rights and freedoms of citizens are duty of all state bodies, public organizations, and officials. Citizens of the Soviet Union have the right to protection by the courts against encroachments on their honor and reputation, life and health, and personal freedom and property.
Property?
Unless, of course, you get sent to the Gulag or Siberia or whatever. In Soviet America, government limits you. And going back to Joe's question, what would Hitler do? Weimar Republic, Article 114. The rights of the individual are inviolable. Unless you're a Jew, gypsy, business owner.
Anyone a question?
Say the wrong thing, criticize a mustache. And incidentally, going back to the American First Amendment, Everybody knows that John Adams had a congressman from Vermont, I believe his name was Matthew Lyon, incarcerated and fined for calling Adams his rotundity. Yeah, 36 people were jailed for criticizing the president or the Congress. The vice president was fair game.
Yeah, that was like 6 years after the Constitution.
Yeah.
This was the Alien Sedition Act?
Yeah. Now, I think with the vice president being fair game, that might be some lobbying on the part of Jay Leno. Excuse me. Now, interestingly enough, within the first couple of years, many of the violations that were written in the Declaration of Independence against the Crown were repeated. Tax rates were higher. George Washington sent soldiers to point guns at protesters that were unhappy about a new beverage tax. Adams had the Alien and Sedition Acts. King George had seditious libel. And of course, you had the empire building, the invasion of Canada, and I even believe that Madison attempted to, asserted the right to try American soldiers by military tribunal during the War of 1812. Early NDAA. Well, I guess we could always reform it. Let's see what Lawrence Reed says about reform. Have you ever noticed that the statists are always reforming their handiwork? Education reform, healthcare reform, welfare reform, tax reform, government reform, this possible Article 5 convention that Mark Levin's talking about. The very fact that they are always busy reforming is an implicit admission that they didn't get it right the first 50 times. Once again, it is a failure of coercive central planning. And I think everybody here knows that there was a lot of subterfuge with the Constitutional Convention. And at the end, Ben Franklin came out, says to that woman, if you like your freedom from an overbearing central power, you can keep it. We know that voting is not going to change anything. If it was, we wouldn't have gotten to this position already. I am an anarchist. No, I don't throw bombs and break windows. Drones throw bombs. Paintings break windows. I believe that people are better able to order their own selves than a coercive central power that suffers from human fallibility and succumbs to the influence of the ring of power. Now, strangely enough, I'm the bad guy. I hear stuff like, well, why don't you move to Somalia? Why don't you move to North Korea? It's a total state. Why is it that statists are always telling the people that want to leave them alone to go somewhere else? And they embrace the people that are torturing them. Now, don't tread on me unless it's in Article 1, Section 8. I don't believe that the state is part of natural human nature. I believe that it's a temporary blip. I believe it's something that will eventually pass. Many people are afraid of it because, one, they worry about where the roads will come from.
Roads!
Yeah, roads! I can't believe that people don't say that, or that people still say that. That just baffles me. But they also buy into this Hobbesian nonsense that without the government, the strong would be murdering the weak, and then the less strong would be cannibalizing the remains. That without government to keep us in line, it would just be a murder fest.
Couldn't get out looking at what he was doing.
Let's see what Bob Higgs has to say about that. Anarchists did not try to carry out genocide against the Armenians in Turkey. They did not deliberately starve millions of Ukrainians. They did not create a system of death camps to kill Jews, Gypsies, and Slavs in Europe. They did not firebomb scores of large German and Japanese cities and drop nuclear bombs on 2 of them. They did not carry out a great leap forward that killed scores of millions of Chinese. They did not attempt to kill everybody with any appreciable education in Cambodia. They did not launch one aggressive war after another. They did not implement trade sanctions that killed perhaps 500,000 Iraqi children. In debates between anarchists and statists, a burden of proof clearly should rest on those who place their trust in the state. Anarchy's mayhem is wholly conjectural. The state's mayhem is undeniably factually horrendous.
Here, here.
How do you reform that? Vote harder?
Yeah.
Get the right people in charge? Get back to the magic piece of parchment? Now, granted, these things, that didn't happen here. Part of it, yeah,
Genocide.
Yeah, part of it was caused overseas. The great majority of it. Now, granted, the U.S. did partake in the firebombing and not dropping nuclear bombs, but let's see what.
Genocide of the Plains Indians.
Yeah, let's see what can happen here.
200,000 in Philippines.
It was not the anarchists that waged a murderous campaign against American Indians and stole their land and relegated them to early concentration camps, invaded Canada and Mexico to expand the empire, or killed over 600,000 of his countrymen to preserve the Union. It was not the anarchists that codified slavery into law, made it illegal to harbor an escaped slave, or injected black men with syphilis at Tuskegee and other eugenics projects. The anarchist did not write the Jim Crow laws either, nor did he lock Japanese Americans into concentration camps just for being Japanese Americans. Furthermore, it was not the anarchists that locked millions of people in cages for not paying their fair share, for possessing a plant, for possessing prohibited types of firearms, both of which are property, a natural right. If the whole purpose of the government is to secure our natural rights, we have to look back at what something Jefferson said. A government that is strong enough to give you everything you want is also strong enough to take it all away. By that logic, it stands to reason that a government that is strong enough to secure your rights is also strong enough to take them all away. Of course, you could have that government that is strong enough and just hope they don't do anything icky.
Only the right person would be in charge.
Well, we just got to vote harder next time. 2016's the difference. Finally, the anarchist has not locked people in cages for exposing war crimes, spied on your communications, militarized the police forces, or stockpiled large amounts of weapons and ammo while passing laws like indefinite detention and the Patriot Act. All this makes the harassment of children's lemonade stands, the road piracy, and other nanny laws into small potatoes, and just a minor irritation to complain about. We are told that there are 3 boxes that we can use. I think the ballot box is proven to be utterly useless, because most likely what America will be presented with in 2016 is going to be Chris Christie and Hillary Clinton. That awkward moment when you realize nothing changes, and you probably didn't learn anything in the previous cycles. Thomas Jefferson said it is the nature of government to grow and for liberty to decrease. It doesn't matter who's in charge. The momentum, the rolling of the giant snowball, the avalanche down the cliff is already going. It's not stopping. Just like rioters don't all of a sudden say, "Holy cow, I should quit beating the hell out of these people." The riot ends when it ends. when it burns out. I think the state will do the same. Now, I don't have any answers on how to get rid of this monster. I wish I did. I personally believe that when there's no longer a demand for the state, it will go away. It will fight like hell to stay alive, but ultimately it will go away. Governments, although everything they do is at the conquest of the governed, they ultimately survive through the concept of the government. And when there is no longer a tolerance, I believe that it will go away. For how long? I don't know. Humans have proven that if there are lessons to be learned from history, they'll learn the wrong ones. I don't know how it's going to happen. I imagine it's probably going to be pretty damn messy. I imagine that this 7 billion population that we have is probably not going to be that high. So what do? I personally think that the best way to move those that are movable is like these people that watch the Soviet Union collapse and they're still demanding socialism. They're not moving. Now, they're sticking with their social contract and everything else. They are not moving. We don't need everybody. For those that are susceptible to seeing things, I personally believe that the best way to win converts over is to live it and be an example of what liberty can bring. People have a tendency to see other people doing stuff and they like it. They get on the bandwagon. Good advertising. Go out, be free. Work voluntarily. Show people that you can live and do these things outside of the state. And for God's sakes, don't kill and cannibalize anybody. They'll steer them off. So, that's my 2 cents on it. And in case anybody was wondering, I don't watch Glenn Beck anymore. Any questions, smart-ass remarks? Hold the death rest, please.
I just point out that I believe that Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, that writing was about the U.S. involvement in the Philippines after the Spanish-American War.
I don't know that for a fact, but it's quite possible.
He protested it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. My understanding of this, and I got this from the Tom Woods lecture, he had actually wanted this published after his death because it was so politically untenable.
Oh, yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to go back
He was against the Spanish-American War.
There's one line that I should have read, but I didn't get to it because I was trying to keep the time down. This is after he has said his piece and let everybody know and then walked away. It says, it was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said. Anything else?